The gunshot that rang out across the desert morning wasn't meant to kill anyone, but it shattered Zara Fletcher's world just the same. She stood on the dusty porch of her father's church in Alta, Utah, her worn traveling bag clutched in trembling hands as Reverend Thomas Fletcher fired his pistol into the air one more time, as if the first shot hadn't made his point clear enough. It was June of 1882, and the summer heat already pressed down on the small mining town like a heavy blanket, but the cold in her father's eyes chilled her to the bone. "You are no daughter of mine," he said, his voice carrying across the churchyard where a dozen townspeople had gathered to witness her shame. "You have chosen sin over salvation, and I will not harbor such wickedness under my roof." Zara's fingers tightened on the handle of her bag. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to make him understand that loving Sarah had felt as natural as breathing, but the words died in her throat. Sarah was already gone, sent away on the morning stage to live with relatives in California, her parents having dealt with their own daughter's transgression more quietly, more mercifully. At least Sarah hadn't been thrown out like yesterday's refuse. "Papa, please," Zara managed to whisper, but he had already turned his back on her, his tall frame rigid with righteous anger as he climbed the steps back into the church. Her mother stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her weathered face, but she said nothing. She never did. Zara descended the church steps on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye upon her. Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl tighter and turned away. Mr. Phillips spat in the dirt. Young Tommy Morrison, who had always been kind to her, looked at his boots and wouldn't meet her gaze. She was 20 years old, had never been more than 50 miles from this town, and now she had nowhere to go and less than $3 to her name. She walked down Main Street with her head held as high as she could manage, though shame burned in her chest like hot coals. Alta was a small town built up around the silver mines that had drawn prospectors and families alike over the past decade. Everyone knew everyone's business, and by now everyone knew hers. The whispers followed her like tumbleweeds in the wind. The general store, the saloon, the assayer's office, the livery stable. She passed them all, her feet carrying her toward the edge of town without conscious thought. Where could she go? What could she do? Women didn't just strike out on their own in the Utah territory, not without money or prospects or family to take them in. She could try to get work as a seamstress or a cook, but who in Alta would hire the disgraced preacher's daughter now? She had just reached the last building on the outskirts when a voice called out, "Miss Fletcher." Zara turned to find Zachariah Donovan standing beside a black gelding, his hat in his hands. She knew him by sight, though they had never spoken more than a polite greeting. He worked one of the cattle ranches outside of town, came into Alta once or twice a month for supplies. He was somewhere in his mid-20s, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-green like sage after rain. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. "I heard what happened. Your father, he had no right." "He has every right," Zara said bitterly. "I live under his roof. I eat his food. I wore his name. Had every right, I should say." Zachariah studied her for a long moment, and she had the strangest feeling he could see right through her brave facade to the terrified girl beneath. "Where will you go?" "I don't know." The admission cost her, but what was the point in lying? The whole town knew she had nowhere to turn. He put his hat back on, tugged the brim down against the glare of the sun. "The Diamond Ranch is about 15 miles northeast of here. Owner's name is Catherine Diamond, a widow woman who runs cattle. She's always looking for help with the cooking and cleaning. Hard work, but she pays fair, and she doesn't much care about a person's past." Hope flared in Zara's chest, painful and bright. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need somewhere to go, and because your father's wrong." He pulled himself up into the saddle, settled his weight. "Love ain't never wrong, Miss Fletcher. People who say otherwise are just scared of things they don't understand." Before she could respond, Before she could even process the kindness in his words, he had turned his horse and ridden off down the street, dust rising in his wake. Zara stood there for a long moment, the morning sun beating down on her bonnet, her traveling bag growing heavier by the second. Then she squared her shoulders and walked to the livery stable. With the last of her money, she hired a wagon and driver to take her to the diamond ranch. She didn't look back at the church, at her father's house, at the only home she had ever known. Looking back would break her, and she couldn't afford to break. Not yet. The journey to the diamond ranch took most of the day, the wagon rattling along rutted roads that cut through scrubland and rocky hills. The driver, an older man named Pete, didn't ask questions and didn't offer conversation, which suited Zara fine. She needed the silence to think, to plan, to somehow make sense of the ruins of her life. She had known, of course, that loving Sarah was dangerous. They had been careful, stealing moments alone when they could, meeting in the church basement after everyone had gone home, walking together along the creek on Sunday afternoons where the trees grew thick enough to hide them. They had been so careful. But someone had seen them kissing behind the church 2 weeks ago, had run straight to Reverend Fletcher with the news, and everything had unraveled so fast that Zara still felt dizzy from it. Sarah's face haunted her, the way her blue eyes had filled with tears when their parents had discovered them, the way she had reached for Zara's hand one last time before her father had dragged her away. They had promised each other they would find a way to be together, but Zara didn't see how that was possible now. Sarah was in California, and Zara was heading to a cattle ranch to cook for strangers, and the distance between them felt as vast as the ocean. The sun was low on the horizon when the wagon crested a rise and the diamond ranch came into view. It was larger than Zara had expected, a sprawling wooden house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and a barn that could have held half the population of Alta. Cattle grazed across rolling hills as far as she could see, dark shapes against the gold-lit grass. A woman stood on the porch, one hand shading her eyes as she watched the wagon approach. She was perhaps 40, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a dress that had seen better days. When Pete pulled the wagon to a stop, she came down the steps with the confident stride of someone who had spent her whole life working hard. "Help you?" she asked, her eyes moving from Pete to Zara with undisguised curiosity. Zara climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Mrs. Diamond, my name is Zara Fletcher. I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden. I'm a hard worker, and I won't cause trouble." Catherine Diamond's eyes narrowed. "You're the preacher's daughter from Alta." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast, even out here in the wilderness. Zara lifted her chin. "I was. I'm not anymore." "I heard what happened." Catherine crossed her arms. "I don't much care who a person loves, so long as they do their work, but I need to know you're not going to bring trouble to my door. Your father's got a long reach in these parts." "He won't come here," Zara said with more certainty than she felt. "He's made it clear I'm dead to him." Something softened in Catherine's weathered face. "Well then, I could use someone to help with the cooking and the housework. My regular girl ran off and got married last month. Pay is $20 a month, plus room and board. You'll have a room in the house, take your meals with me and the ranch hands. Work starts at dawn and ends when it's done. Sundays you can rest, though there's still animals to tend. Interested?" $20 a month was more than Zara had expected. "Yes, madam, very interested." "Good, Pete. Help her with that bag." Catherine turned and headed back to the house. "Come on then, I'll show you your room. Supper's in an hour and you can start earning your keep tomorrow." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the eastern hills. After Pete had left and Catherine had gone back to her work, Zara sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time since her father had cast her out. She cried for Sarah, for her lost home, for the mother who wouldn't stand up for her and the father whose love had proved to be conditional. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen, and then she washed her face in the basin and went downstairs to help with supper. The ranch employed 5 men, all of them weathered and wind-worn from years of outdoor work. They eyed Zara with varying degrees of curiosity over the meal of beef stew and biscuits, but Catherine made it clear with a single sharp look that there would be no questions and no comments. After supper, Zara cleaned the dishes while Catherine sat at the kitchen table with her account books, and they worked in companionable silence until the light faded and it was time for bed. That first night, Zara lay awake in the unfamiliar room and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. Cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the house in the wind, an owl hooting somewhere close by. It was so different from town, from the church where she could hear her father's voice rising and falling in practice sermons, from the bedroom she had shared with her younger sister until Annie had died of scarlet fever 3 years ago. Everything was different now. Everything was new and strange and frightening. But she was free. For the first time in her life, she was free to be exactly who she was, without hiding or pretending or living in fear of discovery. The price of that freedom had been steep, but as she finally drifted off to sleep, Zara thought maybe, just maybe, it had been worth it. The days fell into a rhythm. Zara woke before dawn to start the coffee and begin breakfast for the ranch hands. Eggs, bacon, flapjacks, toast, whatever Catherine had on hand. The men ate like horses and worked like oxen, disappearing into the dawn light to tend the cattle, mend fences, break horses, and do the 1,000 other tasks that kept a ranch running. After breakfast, Zara cleaned the house, did the laundry, tended the vegetable garden, prepared the midday meal, and started the whole cycle over again for supper. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in her father's house, but it was honest work, and Catherine treated her fairly. The older woman was gruff and didn't waste words, but she was kind in her way. She never asked about what had happened in Alta, never pried into Zara's past, never made her feel like anything other than a valued employee. 3 weeks after Zara arrived at the Diamond Ranch, Zachariah Donovan rode up one morning while she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. She saw him coming from a distance, recognized the black gelding and the easy way he sat in the saddle. Her heart did something strange in her chest, a little flutter that she didn't quite understand. He dismounted when he reached her, tied his horse to the fence post. Miss Fletcher. Mr. Donovan. She draped a wet sheet over the line, conscious of how she must look with her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its pins. What brings you out this way? Business with Mrs. Diamond. He hesitated, then added, wanted to see how you were settling in. Well enough. She reached for another sheet, grateful for something to do with her hands. It was kind of you to suggest this place. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. You'd have figured something out. He said it with such certainty that she looked at him in surprise. You've got steel in you, Miss Fletcher. Anyone can see that. She didn't feel like she had steel in her. Most days she felt like she was barely holding herself together, like one wrong word or gesture would shatter her completely. But she appreciated the sentiment. Thank you. He shifted his weight, looked out across the hills. Have you heard from your friend? The one who went to California? The question caught her off guard. She had told no one about Sarah, not even Catherine. How did you know about that? Small town, he said simply. People talk. I put the pieces together. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only curiosity and something that might have been sympathy. No, I haven't heard from her. I don't expect to. Why not? Because her parents will be watching her like hawks, and because even if she could get a letter out, she doesn't know where I am. The words came out more bitter than she intended. It's over. That part of my life is over. Zachariah was quiet for a moment, his gray-green eyes studying her face. Maybe, he said finally, or maybe it's just beginning. Before she could ask what he meant by that, Catherine called out from the porch that she was ready to talk business, and Zachariah tipped his hat and walked away. Zara stood there with a wet sheet in her hands, watching him go, wondering why his words had sent such a strange warmth through her chest. Over the next few months, Zachariah became a regular visitor to the Diamond Ranch. He was doing some kind of work for Catherine, helping to negotiate prices with buyers in Salt Lake City, and representing her interests at cattle auctions. Zara didn't understand all the details, but she gathered that he had a reputation for honest dealing and a sharp mind for business, which made him valuable in an industry where both qualities were in short supply. He always made a point of seeking her out when he visited, of exchanging a few words or asking how she was doing. It was never anything improper, nothing that would have raised eyebrows, but Zara found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. There was something steady about him, something calm and reassuring. When he looked at her, she didn't feel like the disgraced preacher's daughter. She felt like herself. One afternoon in early September, he found her in the vegetable garden pulling up the last of the summer squash. The air had turned cooler, carrying the first hint of autumn, and the leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek were just beginning to turn gold. "Mrs. Diamond said I might find you out here," he said, squatting down beside the garden row. "Need a hand? I won't turn it down." She handed him a basket, and they worked together in comfortable silence for a while, pulling vegetables and brushing off the dirt. "Can I ask you something?" Zachariah said eventually. "You can ask, I might not answer." "Fair enough." He set a large squash in the basket. "Do you miss it? Town, I mean, your family." Zara sat back on her heels, considered the question. "I miss my mother. I miss what I thought my family was before I learned that their love had conditions. I don't miss the church or my father's sermons or the way everyone in town knew my business." She pulled up another plant, shook the dirt from its roots. "I miss Sarah. I miss her every day." "Have you thought about writing to her?" "Every day," Zara admitted. "But I don't know what I would say. That I'm sorry? That I wish things were different? That I still love her?" She shook her head. "What's the point? We can't be together. We'll never be together. The world won't allow it." "The world's a bigger place than you think," Zachariah said quietly. "There are places where people like you can live freely. Cities back east. Communities out west. Places where you wouldn't have to hide." She looked at him sharply. "How do you know about places like that?" He was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on the vegetables. "My brother," he said finally. "Jacob. He was different too. Not like you, but different. He preferred the company of men, if you take my meaning. Our father found out when Jacob was 19, beat him within an inch of his life and threw him out." Zara's heart clenched. "What happened to him?" "Last I heard, he was in San Francisco working as a clerk in a shipping office. He writes sometimes, tells me about the life he's built there. He's happy, Miss Fletcher. He found people like him, found a place where he belongs, found love even though he can't marry legal." Zachariah's voice was thick with emotion. "Point is, there are places, there are possibilities. Your story doesn't have to end here." She didn't know what to say to that. For months, she had been trying to accept that her life would be one of quiet solitude, of hard work and loneliness, of a future without love or companionship. The idea that there might be another way, that there might be hope, was almost too much to bear. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love to hate and ignorance," he said, "and because you deserve better than to spend your life believing you're broken or wrong. You're not wrong, Miss Fletcher. You're just different, and different ain't a sin." Tears pricked at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "Your brother is lucky to have you." "I was lucky to have him." Zachariah stood, brushed the dirt from his knees. "I should get back to work. Mrs. Diamond wants to discuss the prices for next month's sale." He walked away, leaving Zara alone in the garden with a basket of vegetables and a heart full of confused emotions. She had spent so long being told she was sinful, unnatural, an abomination, that hearing someone say otherwise felt like a revelation. And not just someone, Zachariah Donovan, who was kind and decent and saw her as a person rather than a problem. That night, she lay awake and thought about San Francisco, about communities where people like her could live openly, about Sarah, somewhere in California, possibly close enough to reach, about the possibility that her story might not be over after all. But the distance between possibility and reality was vast, and Zara had no money, no connections, no way to even begin such a journey. So she pushed the thoughts aside and focused on what she could control: her work, her daily routine, the small life she was building for herself at the Diamond Ranch. As autumn deepened and the days grew shorter, Zara and Zachariah fell into an easy friendship. He visited the ranch once or twice a week, always on some business matter or another, and always found time to talk with her. They discussed books, though neither of them had much opportunity to read. They talked about the changing seasons, about the cattle market, about the small happenings of ranch life. They carefully avoided discussing her past or his brother or anything that might stir up painful emotions. It was comfortable, safe, and somewhere along the way, without meaning to or wanting to, Zara began to develop feelings for him that had nothing to do with friendship. It started small. The way her heart would lift when she saw him riding up the road. The way she found herself looking for excuses to be outside when she knew he was coming. The way his rare smiles made her feel warm all over. She tried to ignore it, told herself she was being foolish. She loved Sarah. She had always loved Sarah. She wasn't attracted to men. Except she was attracted to Zachariah, and denying it didn't make it any less true. The realization terrified her. After everything she had been through, after losing her family and her home because of who she loved, the idea that she might be attracted to a man felt like a betrayal of herself. But feelings didn't follow logic, and the more time she spent with Zachariah, the harder it became to ignore what was growing between them. The first snow came in late October, early even for Utah, dusting the hills white and forcing the ranch hands to bring the cattle down from the higher pastures. Zachariah was there helping with the drive, riding hard for 3 days straight to get the herd safely in. When it was done, Catherine invited him to stay for supper, and he accepted gratefully. Zara had made a pot roast with vegetables and fresh bread, and they ate at the big kitchen table while the wind howled outside and snow piled up against the windows. The ranch hands finished quickly and retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Zara, Catherine, and Zachariah to linger over coffee. "You should stay the night," Catherine said, pouring another cup. "That snow's coming down hard, and the road back to town will be treacherous in the dark." "I appreciate that, madam." Zachariah wrapped his hands around his cup, warming them. "If it's no trouble at all. Zara can make up the guest room." Zara nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the thought of Zachariah sleeping under the same roof. She cleared the dishes and went upstairs to prepare the room, building a fire in the small stove and laying out clean linens. When she came back down, Catherine had retired to her own room, and Zachariah was banking the fire in the main hearth. "All set," Zara said. "Top of the stairs, first door on the left." "Thank you." He straightened, and in the firelight, his eyes looked more green than gray. "This is a good place you've landed, Miss Fletcher. I'm glad it worked out." "So am I." She should have said goodnight then, should have gone to her own room, but something made her linger. "Zachariah, can I ask you something?" It was the first time she had used his given name, and something shifted in his expression. "Anything. Do you think it's possible to love more than one person, or to love different people in different ways?" He considered the question carefully, as he considered everything. "I think love's bigger and stranger and more complicated than most people want to admit. I think it can look 100 different ways, and who's to say which way is right or wrong? My father would say there's only one right way," Zara said bitterly. "Man and woman, sanctified by God and the church." "Your father's never been in love," Zachariah said. "Or if he has, he's forgotten what it feels like. Love ain't something you can put in a box and wrap up neat. It's wild and unpredictable, and it don't ask permission." She looked at him standing there in the firelight, this man who had shown her more kindness and understanding than her own family, and she felt something break open inside her chest. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered, "and I don't know what to do about it." The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the snow hissing against the windows and the pop and crackle of the fire. Zachariah didn't move, didn't speak, and Zara felt panic rising in her throat. She had ruined everything. She had misread the situation completely, and now he would pull away and she would lose the only friend she had in this new life. Then he crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and cupped her face in his rough, work-worn hands. "I've been in love with you since the day I saw you standing on the edge of town with your whole world falling apart and your head held high," he said. "But I didn't think you could ever feel the same way, not after everything you've been through." "I didn't think I could either," she admitted. "I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. But then I met you and everything got complicated. Do you still love her, Sarah?" The question was gentle, without accusation or jealousy. Zara considered it honestly. "I'll always love her. She was my first love, and that will always mean something. But she's gone, and she's not coming back. And I think I've been using my grief over losing her as a shield to protect myself from feeling anything new." She looked up into his eyes. "I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to be afraid of what I feel." "Then don't be," he said, and kissed her. It was nothing like kissing Sarah. Sarah had been soft and tentative, all gentle touches and whispered endearments. Zachariah was solid and sure, his kiss firm and confident, tasting of coffee and wood smoke. Zara's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and she kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing and hope that had been building inside her for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachariah rested his forehead against hers. "I need you to be sure about this," he said. "I need you to be sure about us, because if we start down this road, I'm in it for the long haul. I don't do things halfway." "I'm sure," Zara said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "I'm terrified and confused, and I don't understand half of what I'm feeling, but I'm sure about you." He kissed her again, slower this time, and Zara felt the last of her resistance crumble. She had spent so long believing she had to be one thing or another, that loving women meant she couldn't love men, that there was only one way to be herself. But standing there in Zachariah's arms, she understood that identity was more complex than that. She could love Sarah and love Zachariah. She could be true to herself and still allow herself to grow and change. Love wasn't a zero-sum game where one feeling canceled out another. They stayed there by the fire until the logs burned down to embers, talking in low voices about the future they might build together. Zachariah told her about his dreams of starting his own ranch someday, of building something lasting and good. Zara told him about her fear of never being enough, of always being the girl who got thrown out of her father's church. He listened to all of it without judgment, holding her hand and occasionally pressing kisses to her temple, and Zara felt something in her chest that had been locked tight for months begin to loosen and unfurl. Eventually, reluctantly, they parted for the night. Zara lay in her narrow bed and listened to the wind and thought about the way Zachariah had looked at her, like she was something precious and worth protecting. For the first time since leaving Alta, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the world transformed by snow. Zachariah stayed for breakfast, and if Catherine noticed the way he and Zara kept stealing glances at each other, she didn't comment. After the meal, he saddled his horse and prepared to head back to town. Zara walked him out to the yard, pulling her shawl tight against the cold. "When will you be back?" "Few day," he said, checking his saddle straps. "I've got some business to finish up in Alta, then I need to make a trip to Salt Lake City, but I'll be back, I promise." "Be careful on the roads." He swung up into the saddle, looked down at her with those gray-green eyes that seemed to see right into her soul. "Zara Fletcher, will you let me court you proper? With Mrs. Diamond's permission and everything done right and above board?" Her heart swelled. "Yes, I would like that very much." "Good." He grinned, and it transformed his usually serious face. "Because I intend to marry you, Miss Fletcher, if you'll have me. Might take some time to get there, but that's where we're heading." He rode off before she could respond, leaving her standing in the snow with her mouth open and her heart singing. Marriage? A future? A life with someone who saw all of her and loved her anyway. The next few months passed in a blur of work and courtship. Zachariah visited as often as his business allowed, always with Catherine present to maintain propriety. They took walks along the creek, sat together in the parlor in the evenings, talked about everything and nothing. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry from Salt Lake City, a hair ribbon in deep blue, a carved wooden bird that he had made himself. She cooked his favorite meals and mended his shirts and fell more deeply in love with him every day. Catherine watched it all with approval. "He's a good man," she told Zara one evening as they cleaned up after supper, "and steady and honest. You could do a lot worse." "I know," Zara said. "I still can't quite believe he wants me. After everything." "After everything, you're still standing," Catherine said firmly. "That counts for something. That counts for a lot." Winter deepened, and the work of the ranch continued. Zara learned to bake bread in the temperamental stove, to render fat for soap, to preserve meat and vegetables for the long months ahead. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the way each season brought its own challenges and rewards. She grew stronger, both in body and spirit, and the girl who had stood trembling on the church steps with nowhere to go seemed like someone from another lifetime. In February, Zachariah asked Catherine's permission to marry Zara, and Catherine gave it gladly. They set the date for early April, after the worst of the winter had passed but before the spring cattle drive began. There would be a simple ceremony at the ranch presided over by a circuit judge who made regular rounds through the territory. No church, no preacher, nothing that would remind Zara of her father and the pain he had caused. As the wedding approached, Zara found herself thinking often of Sarah. She wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she ever thought about the girl she had loved in a small Utah town. Part of her wished she could invite Sarah to the wedding, could explain that loving Zachariah didn't diminish what they had shared. But she had no way to contact her, and perhaps it was better that way. Some chapters needed to close completely before new ones could begin. 2 weeks before the wedding, a letter arrived for Zara. Catherine brought it in from town, eyebrows raised. "Postmarked from San Francisco," she said, handing it over. Zara's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in familiar handwriting. "Dear Zara," it read, "I hope this letter finds you. It took me months to discover where you had gone. I wanted you to know that I'm safe and well. My parents sent me to live with my aunt in California, but when we arrived, she turned out to be nothing like them. She helped me travel to San Francisco, where I've found work and a community of people like us. I'm happy here, Zara. Truly happy in a way I never was in Alta. I'll always treasure what we shared, but I think we both knew it couldn't last. I hope you found peace and happiness too. You deserve all the good things in the world. With love, Sarah." Zara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Sarah was safe. Sarah was happy. The guilt and grief she had been carrying for months lifted, leaving behind only a bittersweet ache and a genuine joy that Sarah had found her place in the world. "Good news?" Catherine asked gently. "The best," Zara said, wiping her eyes. "An old friend is doing well. I'm so glad she's doing well." That night, she showed the letter to Zachariah. He read it carefully, then pulled her into his arms. "I'm glad she wrote," he said. "I'm glad you have that closure." "Me too." Zara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I feel like I can finally move forward now. Like I have permission to be happy." "You always had permission," Zachariah said. "You just needed to give it to yourself." The wedding took place on a bright April morning with the creek running high with snowmelt and the cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out. Zara wore a simple dress of pale green that Catherine had helped her sew, and Zachariah wore his Sunday best, his hair freshly cut and his boots polished to a shine. Catherine stood as witness, along with 2 of the ranch hands who had become friends over the past months. Judge Morrison, no relation to Tommy from Alta, performed a brief ceremony on the front porch of the ranch house. He spoke about partnership and respect, about building a life together through hard work and dedication. When he asked if they would take each other as husband and wife, Zara and Zachariah said, "I do," with voices that rang clear and certain. There was no grand celebration afterward, just a nice meal that Zara and Catherine had prepared together, with apple pie for dessert. But as Zara sat at the table with her new husband's hand in hers, surrounded by people who cared about her, she felt happier than she had ever been in her father's church. After the meal, Zachariah took her aside. "I have something for you," he said, and led her to where his horse was tied. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a set of documents. "I've been saving for a while now, and I made some good investments last year. I bought land, Zara, 300 acres about 10 miles south of here, with good water and grazing. I want to build our ranch there, build our home." Zara looked at the deed, at their names written together in official script, and felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. "Zachariah, this is too much." "It's not enough," he said seriously. "You gave up everything to be who you are. I want to give you a place where you never have to hide again, where you can be exactly yourself, and where we can build something good together." She kissed him there in the yard, not caring who might see, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they broke apart, both breathless, Zachariah was smiling, that rare smile that made him look years younger. "Let's go see it," he said. "Let's go see our land." They rode out that afternoon, just the two of them, following the creek south until it bent east, and the land opened up into rolling hills dotted with sage and juniper. Zachariah's property sat in a valley with the creek running through it, sheltered from the worst winds by the surrounding hills. Zara could picture it already. A house with a wide porch, a barn, corrals, gardens, a life. "It's perfect," she breathed. "It will be," Zachariah corrected. "It'll take time and work, but we'll get there." They dismounted and walked the land hand in hand, talking about where they would build and what they would plant, making plans that stretched out into a future that suddenly seemed full of promise. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Zachariah pulled Zara close. "I love you," he said. "I know you loved before, and I know you might love again in ways I don't understand. But I need you to know that my love for you ain't conditional. It ain't dependent on you being a certain way or feeling certain things. I love all of you, Zara, every complicated, beautiful part." She looked up at him. This man who had shown her that love could be accepting and unconditional, who had helped her understand that she didn't have to fit into anyone's narrow definition of who she should be. "I love you too," she said, "more than I knew I could. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You showed me that love ain't never wrong, no matter what form it takes." They made love for the first time that night in the small cabin on the Diamond Ranch that Catherine had tactfully offered them for privacy. It was tender and awkward and wonderful. Two people learning each other's bodies and hearts, building intimacy out of trust and affection. Afterward, Zara lay in Zachariah's arms and felt at peace in a way she never had before. Over the next 2 years, they built their ranch from the ground up. Zachariah and hired hands constructed a sturdy house with 3 bedrooms, a wide porch, and windows that let in the morning light. Zara planted gardens and established a chicken coop and learned the ins and outs of ranch management alongside her husband. They worked from dawn to dusk, and it was hard, back-breaking labor, but it was theirs. Catherine remained a close friend and mentor, offering advice and occasionally helping with the larger projects. She taught Zara about breeding cattle and managing accounts, skills that proved invaluable as the ranch grew. By the second spring, they had a modest herd and were starting to turn a profit. Zara never returned to Alta, and her father never reached out. Her mother sent one letter, brief and stilted, saying she hoped Zara was well. Zara wrote back with news of her marriage and her new life, but received no reply. She made peace with it. Some wounds went too deep to heal, and some relationships couldn't be salvaged. She had a new family now. Zachariah, Catherine, the ranch hands who worked for them, the community of ranchers and farmers who treated her with respect. In the summer of 1884, Zara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex tangle of emotions: joy, fear, wonder, anxiety. She told Zachariah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he whooped with delight, picked her up, and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying, "or we're having a baby." The pregnancy was difficult. Zara was sick for the first 4 months, exhausted for the next 3, and uncomfortable for the final 2. But Zachariah was endlessly patient, taking over her chores without complaint and making sure she rested. Catherine came to stay with them as the due date approached, her experienced hands a comfort. Their son was born in March of 1885, during a late-season snowstorm that dumped 2 feet of snow on the valley. The labor was long and hard, but when Zara finally held her baby in her arms, all the pain evaporated. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray-green eyes. They named him Jacob, after Zachariah's brother, and Zachariah wrote to San Francisco with the news. A month later, a package arrived with a silver christening cup and a letter from Jacob expressing his joy and congratulations. Inside was also a photograph: Jacob and another man, both smiling, standing close together in front of a house. On the back, Jacob had written, "This is Henry. We've been together 5 years now. Be happy for me, brother, as I am happy for you." Zachariah showed Zara the photograph, tears in his eyes. "He's built a life," he said, "a real life with love and happiness. I'm so glad he has that." "So am I," Zara said, studying the photograph. The 2 men looked genuinely happy, the kind of happiness that couldn't be faked. It reminded her that there were many kinds of love in the world, many ways to build a family. As little Jacob grew, the ranch prospered. They expanded their herd, hired more help, became known in the territory for quality cattle and fair dealing. Zachariah's reputation grew, and he was often called upon to mediate disputes or offer advice. Zara managed the household and the accounts, raised their son, and occasionally thought about the preacher's daughter she had once been. When Jacob was 3, Zara gave birth to twin daughters named Annabelle and Rose. The house that had seemed so spacious suddenly felt crowded with children, but it was a good kind of crowded, full of noise and love and laughter. Zachariah was a devoted father, patient with the children's endless questions and always willing to play or read stories. One evening, when the children were finally asleep and Zara and Zachariah sat on the porch enjoying a rare moment of peace, she turned to him. "Did you ever imagine this? When you told that scared girl where to find work, did you imagine it would lead here?" "No," he admitted. "I just saw someone who needed help and thought I might be able to give it, but I'm sure glad it worked out this way." "Me too." She laced her fingers through his. "Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if my father hadn't thrown me out. I'd probably still be in Alta teaching Sunday school and pretending to be someone I'm not. I'd be miserable." "You'd have found your way eventually," Zachariah said. "You're too strong not to." "Maybe, but I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful for every moment that led me here, to you, to this life." She looked out over their land, at the house they had built, and the life they had created. "My father said I was choosing sin over salvation, but I think I chose love over hate, and that ain't never wrong." Zachariah pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "Love ain't never wrong," he agreed, "no matter what form it takes." The years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and growth. Jacob started school in the small one-room schoolhouse that had been built near the Diamond Ranch, and the twins followed a few years later. Zara taught them reading and arithmetic at home, made sure they knew their letters and numbers before they set foot in a classroom. She was determined that her children would have every advantage, every opportunity she had been denied. When Jacob was 7, he asked about the grandparents he had never met. Zara took a deep breath and told him the truth, in terms a child could understand. My father and I disagreed about something important, she said. We couldn't find a way to see eye to eye, so we went our separate ways. It's sad, but sometimes that happens in families. What did you disagree about? Jacob asked, ever curious. Zara glanced at Zachariah, who nodded encouragingly. About love, she said carefully. About who people are allowed to love. I believe that love is love, no matter who it's between. My father believed it could only look one certain way. We couldn't bridge that gap. Jacob considered this seriously. I think you were right, he said finally. Love is love. Yes, it is, Zara agreed, pulling him into a hug. Yes, it is. As the children grew, Zara made sure they understood acceptance and compassion. She told them about their Uncle Jacob in San Francisco, about how he lived with another man, and they were happy together. She told them about Aunt Sarah, the friend she had loved in her youth, who had found her own happiness in California. She wanted them to grow up knowing that the world was bigger and more varied than the narrow confines of any one town or church. In 1892, when Jacob was 7 and the twins were 4, Catherine Diamond died peacefully in her sleep. She left the Diamond Ranch to Zara and Zachariah, along with a letter thanking them for their friendship and expressing her confidence in their stewardship. It was a bittersweet legacy, tinged with grief for the woman who had given Zara a chance when no one else would. They merged the two ranches, creating one of the larger cattle operations in the territory. The work was demanding, but they had good help and a solid reputation. Zara took over the business side entirely, proving to have a sharp head for numbers and negotiations. The ranch thrived under their joint management. One summer day in 1895, a woman traveling through stopped at the ranch asking for water for her horse. Zara, who had been working in the garden, stood up and came face to face with Sarah. They stared at each other for a long moment, both of them older, both changed by the years. Sarah's blonde hair was pulled back in a sensible bun, and she wore a traveling suit that spoke of means. Her blue eyes were the same, though, wide and startled and filled with emotion. Zara, she breathed. Sarah. Zara's heart was pounding, but it was a gentle pounding, nostalgic rather than desperate. What are you doing here? Traveling to Salt Lake City on business. I work for a women's rights organization now, advocating for suffrage and property rights. I recognized the ranch name on the map and thought I would chance a visit. She looked around, taking in the prosperous ranch, the house, the children playing in the yard. You've done well for yourself. I have, Zara agreed. She led Sarah to the pump, drew water for her horse. Come inside, have some lemonade, tell me about your life. They sat in the kitchen, and Sarah told her story. She had spent several years in San Francisco, found work as a typist, gotten involved in political organizing. She had met a woman named Claire, and they had been partners for 5 years now. They shared a house, a life, a commitment as deep as any marriage. I'm so happy for you, Zara said, and meant it. I'm glad you found someone who makes you happy. I'm happy for you, too. Sarah nodded toward the window, where Zachariah could be seen working with the horses. That's your husband? Yes, Zachariah Donovan. He's a good man, Sarah, a kind man. He understands about you, about who I was, who I am. He loves all of me. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm glad. I was so worried about you after everything that happened. I wanted to write sooner, but it took me time to get settled. By the time I sent that letter, I wasn't sure you would even want to hear from me. I did, Zara assured her. Your letter came right before my wedding. It gave me closure, let me know you were safe. It was exactly what I needed. They talked for hours, catching up on the years, sharing stories of their lives. When Zachariah came in for lunch and Zara introduced him to Sarah, he greeted her warmly, without a hint of jealousy or discomfort. They all ate together, and Sarah entertained the children with stories of San Francisco, of the Golden Gate and the cable cars and the bustle of city life. As the sun began to set and Sarah prepared to continue her journey, she pulled Zara aside. Thank you, she said, for not being angry, for understanding that people grow and change and love differently at different times. Thank you for being my first love, Zara said, for showing me that I was capable of loving and being loved. I wouldn't be here without you. They embraced and when they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. Sarah mounted her horse and rode off into the gathering dusk, and Zara stood watching until she was just a speck on the horizon. That night, as she and Zachariah lay in bed, she told him everything about Sarah, about their love and the pain of losing it, about the bittersweet joy of seeing her again. He listened without interruption, his arms around her, and when she finished, he kissed her forehead. "I'm glad she came," he said. "I'm glad you got to see her happy." "Me too," Zara whispered. "It feels like a circle closing, like that chapter of my life is finally complete." "One chapter closes, another opens," Zachariah said. "That's how life works." And he was right. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The children grew strong and healthy, learned to ride and rope, to read and cipher. Jacob showed an interest in business and law, spent hours poring over books that Zachariah brought back from Salt Lake City. The twins were inseparable, always exploring, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries in ways that both exasperated and delighted their parents. In 1898, when Jacob was 13, his uncle Jacob came to visit. He arrived with Henry, introducing him simply as his partner, and stayed for 2 weeks. The children adored them, especially when Uncle Jacob taught them card tricks, and Henry showed them how to identify birds by their calls. On the day they left, Jacob pulled his brother aside. "Thank you," he said, "for building a life where we could visit, where we could be ourselves. Not everyone has family like that." "You're my brother," Zachariah said simply. "Nothing will ever change that." After they left, young Jacob asked his parents about the two men, about the nature of their relationship. Zara and Zachariah explained as best they could about how some men loved men and some women loved women, and how that was natural and right and nothing to be ashamed of. Jacob listened seriously, then nodded. "Like love ain't never wrong," he said, repeating the phrase he had heard his parents say countless times. "Exactly like that," Zara confirmed. As the new century dawned, the Donovan Ranch stood as a testament to hard work, love, and acceptance. They employed over a dozen men, ran several hundred head of cattle, and had a reputation that extended throughout the territory and beyond. But more than that, they had built a family grounded in unconditional love. Zara never reconciled with her father. She heard through the grapevine that he had died in 1901, still bitter and unforgiving to the end. Her mother sent a brief note informing her of his passing, but made no invitation to the funeral. Zara mourned not for the man he had been, but for the relationship they might have had if he had been capable of acceptance. On a crisp autumn day in 1903, Zara stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land she and Zachariah had built together. She was 41 years old, her hair showing threads of silver, her hands marked by years of hard work. Their children were growing into fine young people. Jacob was 18 now, talking about studying law back east. The twins were 15, full of fire and opinions about everything from women's suffrage to cattle breeding. Zachariah came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the hills. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving town, losing your family, all of it?" Zara leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "Not for a second," she said. "Every choice I made, every hardship I endured, it all led me here. To you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret that?" "Some people never get to live as their true selves," Zachariah observed. "You could have spent your whole life hiding, pretending, being what your father wanted you to be." "I could have," Zara agreed, "but you taught me something important that first day when you told me about the Diamond Ranch. You taught me that love ain't never wrong, and I've spent every day since trying to live up to that truth." "We both have," Zachariah said, "and we've built something good, something lasting." As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Utah sky, Zara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened girl standing on the church steps with nowhere to go, to the woman she had become, confident, capable, loved, and loving. She thought about Sarah, happy in San Francisco with Claire, about Jacob and Henry, building their life together despite the challenges, about Catherine, who had given her a chance when no one else would. And she thought about Zachariah, who had seen her at her lowest point and had chosen to help, who had become her friend and then her love, who had accepted every complicated part of her without reservation, who had taught her that identity was fluid, that love was vast, that there was room in one heart for many kinds of affection. The preacher's daughter had been cast out for loving wrong, but a cowboy had taught her that love was never wrong in any form, and together they had built a life that proved it. They had created a home where acceptance and compassion reigned, where their children learned that the world was big enough for all kinds of love, where people could be themselves without shame or fear. As Zara and Zachariah turned to go inside, to their children and their warm house and their life together, she felt a deep sense of peace. The scars of her past had healed into something stronger than the original wound. She had been broken and remade, cast out and found, lost and then discovered by someone who loved her without conditions. In the end, that was what mattered, not the judgment of narrow minds or the cruelty of those who couldn't understand. What mattered was love in all its forms and the courage to embrace it wherever it appeared. Love ain't never wrong. It was the truth that had saved her, the truth she had built her life upon, and the truth she would pass down to her children and their children after them. And as the new century unfolded before them, full of promise and possibility, Zara knew that truth would endure.